You're listening to a Pop House Network podcast for developers by developers.
Welcome to Java OffHeap episode 69. Hey everyone, this is Freddie here at the OffHeap podcast. Before I introduce everybody else, I wanted to say I'm super excited. This is almost one of our last year podcasts, and we usually can squeeze in a podcast where most of the people are together. I happen not to be able to travel because if not, I'll be partaking where all the other folks are. But today's episode is mostly recorded at the Roundhouse. And for those who don't remember, the Roundhouse was where all of this started. It all really we all were living together, living close in the same neighborhood. And we decided to just go to a bar and bring some microphones because we used to just geek out and talk a lot about Java technologies and what was going on and technology in general. So this is the bar where it all really started, where we have our first recordings. And I'm happy to say that a lot of the original crew is over there. For those who don't know me, my name is Freddie Guime. I'm one of the principal engineers at Expedia, Java champion, speaker, author, and I'm here with my usual suspects.
All right. Hey, this is Bob Paulin reporting from the Roundhouse in Aurora. So you can see we've got the ambiance here. We've got holiday decorations around. We've got custom draft beer flowing. So all good things, Freddie. You're missing out.
I know. I'm so jealous.
My name is Bob Paulin. I'm an independent consultant from Chicago, Apache Software Foundation member, Java champion, and CJUG board chair.
All right, my name is Josh Juno. I'm application developer by day, as well as database administrator and server patcher. And then I'm an author and speaker, and also do some work with open source on the Apache NetBeans project, as well as I do some work with the E4J project, and as well as a CJUG board member.
I'm Michael Manella, director responsible for Spring Engineering at VMware. Author, speaker, Java champion, curmudgeon at large.
Oh, yeah. And before we dive in, I wanted to thank our sponsor for this episode. This episode is sponsored by Datadog, a monitoring and analytics platform that integrates with over 450 technologies, including AWS services, Docker, and Kubernetes. Datadog's platform brings together metrics, traces, and logs in one place, so you can get full visibility into your environment and improve your application performance. With machine learning-based alerts, customizable dashboards, and distributed tracing, Datadog makes it easy to unify disparate data sources so you can troubleshoot faster. Start your free Datadog trial today. Listeners of this podcast will receive a free t-shirt once you install the agent and create one dashboard. Visit javaoffheap.com/Datadog to get started. Again, that URL is javaoffheap.com/Datadog. And all right, today we're going to talk why the internet is burning and why do we probably all of us have to work over the weekend. So
eventually, but don't we have some news items first before we get to the really depressing stuff? I mean, usually December we do the year in review, and this has been the year of security patching and just hacks.
Oh gosh.
We'll get to the mother of them all before the end of this.
Yes. So that's where we're gonna end. But let's start with the preamble and say the other news that has happened. Guess Josh, go for it. I think this one is yours, right?
So just recently, MicroProfile 5.0 has been released. And for those of you who aren't familiar with MicroProfile, it is utilizing Jakarta EE specifications to make it easy to create microservices-based applications with Jakarta EE. And the big things about MicroProfile 5 is that this is being aligned now with Jakarta EE 9.1. Basically, this creates an incompatible namespace change, so that's important to know before you go ahead and take the leap to upgrade to 5.0. However, once you do upgrade, you'll have lots of nice features to look forward to. I think everything was updated in this release. This includes config, health, fault tolerance, and the gamut. So MicroProfile 5 take a look at it if you haven't.
Does it depend on Log4J?
I don't know, but I can't say one way
That's
or
a
the other.
platform thing, right? Not the APIs, not the specifications.
I don't think it would. I'm not gonna say
If you wanted
one way or the
to,
other.
it probably could. I mean, I actually, it's funny. Recently, I just finally had my first POC where I started using MicroProfile APIs. It's for a Quarkus application because Quarkus implements
MicroProfile.
MicroProfile. Yeah. So it was, it was actually fairly natural to move from, and then I used a bunch of Spring stuff before then, the config implementation, all that stuff. So, I mean, it's they're doing some good work there.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Next up is Eclipse IDE Release.
Yeah, that's for me because I'm the Eclipse user in the group. And the beauty of it is, again, just like the last one, very non-event.
Yeah.
Everything got upgraded. Everything still runs. Everything's still snappy. So, kudos to the Eclipse Foundation on another solid IDE release. I hope.
Any actual features? Like the upgrade, nothing broke.
Nothing broke. There's a dark mode that I'm not using yet. But yeah, as far as like significant new features, a lot of dependency updates, security patches. But as far as features that are going to make your life easier, it just works. That's it.
Nice.
I don't have high expectations for things I get for free, but I love it when it just works out of the box.
Yeah. All right.
Nice.
For our, I guess this is the end of the year IDE releases. The next one is NetBeans, right?
Yes, yep, of course. So NetBeans 12.6 has been released, and this has some great new features for the Java editor. I'm not sure if you've ever fired up NetBeans and you see that NetBeans Java C. That's now upgraded to use JDK 17, which is kind of nice.
Ooh, nice.
And also there's some nice Gradle upgrades for lots around JDK 17 and supporting different APIs and projects that kind of revolve around that. Some Maven upgrades, actually some nice Groovy upgrades as well, and some Jakarta EE features we've updated for Glassfish 6.2 and Lisp and VS Code upgrades, quite a few others. So NetBeans 12.6 probably worth taking a look at if you're using that IDE.
Perfect. And then following on that, we got Spring Native.
Yeah, so Spring Native 0.11 is out. This is actually the last release of the Spring.Native project. Everything going forward is going to be compiled into Boot and framework directly. So with that, with 0.11, there's a brand new, I should say, redesigned AOT engine. That's really the main feature. Check it out. And then, like I said, be watching the Spring Framework 6 and Spring Boot 3 milestones to see this feature, this functionality moved into Spring and Spring Framework.
So does that include all the plugins? So like AOT or the Spring Native Maven plugins, are those going to go into the Boot project or are those still, okay.
The AOT stuff is going to land in Framework, and then there's some niceties that'll land in Boot.
Okay, great. Sounds like it's becoming more official.
That's exactly. It's not going to be a separate project that you got to add on. It's going to be a first-class feature of Spring Framework and Spring Boot.
I guess, and it wasn't really that heavy-handed. Like when it was its own little thing. Well, it's not little, but its own thing. It wasn't not like it was crazy stuff. So yeah, that makes sense. That's
it's
cool.
a little crazy. All the native compile stuff gets a little crazy.
I mean,
one of the big things with this though is the AOT engine. You should get optimizations even if you want to run the AOT version on the JVM.
On the JVM, yeah.
So there'll be optimizations even if you choose not to go to the native route.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so faster startups, even with JVM based.
Smaller memory footprints, etc.
Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
Because of the hints and stuff.
Yeah. Well, it basically it analyzes your configuration in advance, so he doesn't have to do all that figuring on stuff.
Class path scanning. It's already in a file.
Right.
Because that was actually, just even to go on a little tangent, that was one of the interesting things I found going from Spring to MicroProfile, is that when I was using Spring, the annotations, if I extended an annotation, let's say I put the component annotation on an annotation, Spring would go all the way down that annotation hierarchy and say, oh, your component has, or your annotation has a component annotation on it. Whereas when I was doing the MicroProfile, like unless I do an extension to the MicroProfile app, it doesn't go all the way down the annotation class to find all the dependencies.
That's a really challenging part of the challenging corner of the framework, is that whole merged annotation magic that happens. It ain't easy.
Because you expect it just to like annotate something, and you expect it to, oh, that's what it does. But
well, no, it's not that it doesn't work. It's again, like, so it's an annotation on an annotation. Like when I was using Spring, I would create a client custom annotation and I'd add the component annotation to that. And then suddenly the client is a component.
Yeah.
When I do it to MicroProfile, that didn't work. It was an interesting thing. Just footnote, really.
Yeah. That was no surprises, but getting that is hard. Like, like, all right. Conferences. We have DevNexus, which is run by the Atlanta Jog, and like we said before, so far it looks like it's still a go. So
those certainly planned on in person in April.
Yeah, I will. I am dying to go to one that conference. If it's safe, oh please, I need to see more people. Seattle is.
Go to the Waffle House.
We do need to go to Waffle House. That is absolutely a thing we need to do. So many good memories of Waffle House.
Well, yeah.
Those parts aren't hazy. It's just painful.
They're hazy.
It's not. It shouldn't be hazy at that. You're speaking for yourself. Just painful for me at that point. But yeah, no, I mean, unfortunately, jconf.dev in Chicago ended up having to be remote. Again, with the regulations in Chicago and the situation that was there, that the organizers decided to make it remote, and that makes sense. But yeah, hoping in a few more months, everybody keeps saying get back to normal. Yeah, fingers are crossed.
We might be there to create trouble. So that,
we might. We'll see what they do. We've submitted, right?
See if they learned their lesson. It's like, these guys, I don't know about
they
that.
They keep bringing us back, so clearly they're not learning anything.
Let's hope. All right. Now I think those are like the big ones, and now let's go back. Let's go into it. Our discussion topic is, unless you've been living under a rock that is disconnected from like
that is Node.js.
Like you have a tinfoil hat, like the world that was burning. Like I think Wire said the internet is burning, and the reason is because there was if you're hearing this like years from now, this was in 2021 December was the day that there was a Log4J 0-day RZE exploit. And what that means is that if you ever use Log4J, which is the vast majority of like enterprise Java development, the first thing you do is like when you set one of these up is you're starting to figure out your logging strategy. You want to have logs, you do SLF4J, and then, which is sort of like your facade. And then by default, you either choose Log4J or Logback. And that is sort of like what you start with. And that is fairly recent. Before it was, for systems that were built before, Log4j was the thing that people just used. So the footprint on a lot of services and applications that use Log4j is immense. So what was discovered was this vulnerability where, essentially everybody who might be able to, or might be logging something from the user, and not necessarily, we sort of know that we should like filter and anything that the user give us, But some more innocuous things like HTTP headers, like some kind of like get commands and stuff like that. There is a way for you to, if you happen to create a very, very interesting form input or string, that Log4j, instead of just logging it, will do things on it. And the way that the things that it does is like, it sort of tries to retrieve. Go for it.
Don't steal Michael's thunder. He's gonna kill you.
I've got a demo. I've got code.
He's got a demo, but I mean, I think so. Let's talk through just like before everybody freaks out. So I mean, again, Log4j is a very popular framework, and the Log4j dependencies are in a number of places. But when are you impacted? I mean, you're not impacted if you have the Log4j API, correct?
Correct. Yeah.
So it's Log4j 2.4 is the dependency that if you see that in your Maven POM, even if it's transitive, you may be impacted by this CVE because, again, we were talking about headers. Anytime you're logging something, the vulnerability essentially is exploited through a template, right? So there's a way to template out certain things where instead of just, hey, I'm logging a string, it's going to interpret and potentially do things and execute code. I mean, at the end of the day, that's the most impactful means that this comes out is the remote code execution vulnerability. And that doesn't impact everybody. But I think we're going to go into, okay, when do you have to worry about it being remote code execution? When is it just data escaping? So there's various levels of severity that you could be exposed to, depending on the version of Java you're using, depending on the version of Log4j you're using. You may have options to mitigate with properties, some of it, not all of it. You may have to upgrade. Like, there's a lot of different degrees of freedom to this exploit, and it's caused a lot of people to work the weekend.
And I just was going to mention real quick that the bad thing is that they came out with a patch on Friday, and so everybody started to patch to 2.15.0, and then they said earlier this week, hey, oops, there's still some stuff in there. You need to upgrade again. So we all had to do it again.
But I'll say this, because I was looking at the 2.15 to 2.16 though. So for those, just to give a little bit more context, if you happen to be using any version prior to 2.15.0, so 2.15, major 2, minor 15, patch 0, you're affected. If you're using version 1, I think that has other problems, just not this problem. Right, like Log4j 1 has been discontinued, and there's like vulnerabilities just because the library is discontinued. But if you're using Log4j version 2, which is what a lot of us are using, if you have anything before 2.15.0, you might be in trouble, big trouble. Now 2.15 to 2.16, it requires. There is the exploit, but it does like the CVV for it was less than 3 or like was 3.2, and it was because it requires for the exploit to be successful, it requires you to have access to overriding the logging configuration files, and it's one of those like if you already have access to override a logging configuration file, it's like game over anyways. That's why like the severity is not that big.
Well, let's start. Like, I mean, what is the worst thing that can happen here? Michael, you already mentioned remote code execution. Who's vulnerable to that?
Yeah, so can I walk you through how this works?
Yeah, so let's go for it.
Let's walk through it, because I think there's a lot of confusion out there, and I think this is the main thing we can give our listeners is like, when am I in the really bad case, and when am I in the worst, not good case, and when am I like, okay, but still bad things could happen?
Okay, so I have a very simple, super simple Java application. I specifically did not bring in any other dependencies other than Log4j. This is not a framework exploit. This is not blaming, Micronaut or Quarkus or Spring or like, this is a Log4j problem. So it's the only dependency I have. All I'm doing here is I'm setting a property and logging out whatever I pass in as a command line arm. The reason I'm setting a property, going back to what Bob was just mentioning, is depending on the JDK you're using, this property may or may not be set. If it's not set, you are not vulnerable. If this property is not set, the Jndi lookup that causes the RCE will not execute. So to make this simple for me for the case of demo, I hard-coded it. Interesting note, if I comment this out and run it from the JDK that comes with IntelliJ, it's vulnerable. The JDK I'm using in a shell, the SDK man, was not.
It's not.
Which is the reason I added this.
Yeah, because I think it's later versions of 8, versions of 11. Like if you're on a later JDK, that puts you in a better position than folks on the earlier. But that's interesting. That actually, I thought even if you were on later versions of JDK, there's still vulnerabilities, but they're lower, right? Or is if you're on later versions and they're upgraded on the latest stuff, you're good or no?
So if this property is not set, you won't be. It doesn't work. I haven't tried in every JDK version.
Sure.
Full disclosure, I've been focusing on 8.
No, yeah, and
yeah.
The qualifier was like the the Ldap vector of attack will not work.
Okay.
So they are
specifically what I'm getting at.
Yep. Okay. No, that's fine. I just wanted to make sure we qualify it properly, so we know what folks like, because there could be folks out there to say, "Hey, I'm on the latest version of the JDK. Am I fine?"
I'm good. It's like
right.
So the way this version of the exploit works is I'm going to pass in. So I'm going to launch the jar file with this as my command line arm.
Yep.
Right.
And so what Log4J is going to do, so this is going to get passed to here.
You're going to log that.
Right. Log4J is going to do an Ldap lookup at this host and port, which would allow me to inject whatever Ldap port server I want, aka my bad one.
Yep.
And it's going to specifically download this exploit URL. That exploit is Java class. It's a compiled class. And here, all I'm going to do
the calculator.
Now Bob gets the joke I've been making all week. Is this Java class on Mac OS will launch the calculator app.
Fun.
Probably not something you want your Java app doing. So let me go ahead and set this up. I've already built it. And so I've got 2 pieces here. I've got to set up my Ldap server. And the Ldap server actually redirects from an HTTP server. So I need to launch those 2.
And if I'm a bad actor, this is something that I can set up. LDAP doesn't have to be LDAP. It's whatever I want it to be, right?
You got it. So my 2 servers are running. And so now I can go back to here. And I can run this. And so java-char, this is the compiled version of that app I just showed you, passing in the string, and you get a calculator.
Boom.
I've been hacked. Now there are 2 basic ways to mitigate this, depending on, again, version that you're using and whatnot. So the version I'm using is 2.14. So it's right before, this is the last vulnerable version. So this option gives me the ability to just set a property. So basically turning off that Ldap lookup. So as long as I disable it, it's not going to actually make the call, and I should be safe. So if I go ahead and set this, and I run the same command again, no calculator.
Error. Okay.
It just logs in. And then,
Yep.
There was an error log anyways.
Yep.
And this is how a lot of folks that I know have started their mitigation efforts, right? The properties file, if you're using a current version, is probably the easiest way. But there's a lot of code out there that's using versions before this property file exists. So this isn't an option for everybody, right?
Yep. So the other option is to upgrade. And so this is 2.16. So let me go ahead and actually just. I will pop into another shell in a minute so that the
because
is set.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I'll go ahead and
One question on the upgrades here. So you could, if you have an application server loaded with a series of applications that have Log4j 2 and below 2.15 or 2.16, you could swap out those jars and then restart the server.
If you're running from a exploded
Yes.
deployment, yeah, definitely.
Yes.
I am using Maven's plugin to create an executable jar to make this a little easier. Similar to the if you're running a Spring Boot Uber jar.
Mhm.
So if we do this, again, no calculator.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah.
And that's
So, but remote code execution and whether it actually makes the call to the LDAP are different things, right? So if I were to make a call to the LDAP and add some sort of interpolation that's going to give me an environment variable, I could still get that, right? Or does these shut that down? Because I feel like there's different levels of exposure here.
No, so without this, it doesn't interpret anything.
Okay,
So if it doesn't
this
interpret
turns
anything,
interpreting off.
then it's
It's just going to log it whatever you set. Okay.
now, and then
And it's actually funny. Some people joked around that you could use this vulnerability to remote execute in a piece of code that will set the property to turn off vuln.
oh yeah, to like inoculate yourself, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. So going to the mechanics of exactly what's happening, right? Like, because I was thinking it's time to read it. Like, who on their right mind will have something like this, right? Like as a feature. So let's go with what Jndi is. That's the Java naming directory interface, right? And what that is it in olden times, there used to be these
Like the
concepts-
90s.
that was like
2000
ago,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like there
It
was
only
this,
goes back to 95. I mean,
yeah, like there was this concept about like having things that will give you like directory properties, like object properties, and sometimes these object properties, where if you have a server, you have to quote unquote hard code it to that server address. Even if you put it in a configuration, it was kind of weird. So there was this concept of Jndi, which is like, oh, let's just have a centralized registry where I can look up, where should I go and look up for a property or a data, where do I look up for an object or
LDAP.
Yeah. So Jndi was, essentially defined with a central server, and there was what they call the SPI, the server provided interfaces, one implemented for LDAP, one implemented for RMI, one implemented for DNS. Because the idea was that you could just hook these things up together, and then it's like, oh, I'm gonna switch from LDAP to DNS because I can do that, and then it's gonna figure out the URL for my property, right? So this was something that was done in the 90s. With the idea that you don't have to change your configuration files, so just change a registry if you happen to switch where the LDAP was or where the server were, right? So once that was done, then the idea is that then you can retrieve that setting or configuration just by looking at the registry. That's what Jndi does. Now, Log4j decided to add a feature because sometimes you want to get quote unquote data or data properties from a Jndi source. And when you look at the story of the Jira ticket that they opened, they say like, oh, my use case is that I want to know which machine I'm running on the network so I can create logs create log strings that identify that machine. And that machine was connected to an LDAP server, and that LDAP server will say, oh, this is you are this machine with these properties, right? So somebody on, and when you sort of hear it that way, it's a little bit sensible back against in the 2000s when there were like real hard iron things, like there's this server, right? And I want to know which server was it, and how it was registered on the network. So Log4j said, okay, we're gonna create this little like string-like thing where you can specify where do we retrieve the property from, right? And we're going to use Jndi because that's what it's supposed to be for looking up properties that are not within your box. And then we're going to implement the Ldap, we're going to implement the Ldap protocol in the sense that we're just going to use the Ldap SPI from Jndi to retrieve organization unit name, owner of this box, all that stuff, right? And again, makes lots of sense if you were programming in the 90s because it was a big iron, it was a big fat Ldap where everything was filled in. Today, I don't even care about what IP address I'm using because that's so ephemeral, especially in the cloud environment. It's not worth for me to log it, right? So it started with good intentions. It's kind of funny if you actually go now to the Akira, they never close the comment sections. And now there's a bunch of comments. This was a bad idea. Can you please undo this? And it's like
hindsight is 2020, right? I mean, or 2021. It makes sense. And I mean, it's tradition in the Java ecosystem to maintain backwards compatibility. So, I mean, even the maintainers had mentioned, hey, this is really something we probably ought to get rid of. But yeah, it's going to break stuff, so let's not do that. It takes a CVE to say, yeah, we need to get rid of this stuff now. And I mean, we're lucky.
Well, a CVE that's a score of 10. Let's not kid ourselves.
Yep. Yeah, in my life, seen as CVE 10. What was the name of that?
Heartbleed. It's not anyone that had a name.
Although I would say Heartbleed is a lot harder to trigger than this. That you've already showed. This ain't hard.
No. In fact, it's funny you bring that up because there's a whole GitHub repo of examples of people exploiting this. One of my favorite ones is the name of your iPhone. You drop the string in there, and they're able to ping DNS. They're able to see it.
But no, it is the first time like I ever seen Heartbleed 7.5. Yep. Not 10. Not 10.
The scoring algorithm has changed.
What's that?
The scoring algorithm has changed. Up to version 3 now. Heartbleed was under a previous version.
No, that's CVSS 3.1. So,
but this is literally when they said the internet is on fire, it really is, because lots and lots of applications in the enterprise and even not enterprise applications are using Log4J because it's a very nice API for logging.
Well, it's also not just everybody on this call does enterprise development, right? But one of the big things that people talk about is Minecraft. People talk about other devices, talking about video games, random. This isn't Micronauts. This isn't Spring. This isn't Jakarta EE that is focused on enterprise development. This is everywhere there's a JDK.
No, and to be complete, in Minecraft, the way that you trigger this is you open a chat window, and because the chats are being logged, if you just happen to type that same curly bracket JNDI : Ldap, it will boom it on that, and it will go straight to the server. The server will go out and reach to try to get that property. And the way this will work, which Michael was alluding to, is the first part is what is called the Ldap Lookup. So it goes out first and finds that server. Ldap has a particular port where it looks at things, where it runs. And it says hey, I'm being asked to find this property, whatever property name somebody puts in. And then decides to say, okay, to find this property, you should go to this HTTP website. And when you go to that HTTP website, it's just going to serve you a class file that technically within the object, in regular parts, it will find out it will essentially instantiate that object, run the property, and get the property like a JSON, like a JSON property, like a getter and setter. But a lot of people don't even need to go to that. Like you show Michael, you only need a static initializer to start just executing code on that particular part. and because it's essentially downloaded, and if you don't have that trust, don't trust the outside of your class loader zone, it just loads it on the main class loader.
Yeah, so I mean, the one thing that just lays out there, this is a zero-day exploit. Like, how many companies went back through their Splunk logs and started looking at HTTP refers for these very statements? Because it is entirely feasible that people have known about this for years.
Mm-hmm. I don't know about that. I have read that people have already reported that it was being exploited the week before. So
no,
it was actively being exploited before the CVE was announced.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't heard how far back.
It felt fairly recent. Like, at least that seemed to be the consensus. Like, it's been down there. It's just that it, like, the universe of like how many people have seen it before that is very, like, not a lot. This actually does highlight one of the reasons, like, why, and actually it's a pain in the royal butt, but like last week was one of the days I was like, yeah, this is good, which is like the for production systems, the ability to say everything is closed by default, right? Like if you happen to have service in production and you actually, most of the time people just create a blacklist of where not to go. But another way to look at this is like if you're running production systems, you have to whitelist where you want connections to go outbound. And if you have this practice, even though it's a pain in the butt, things like this will be much harder to do, right? Because
you're talking about blocking ports and things like that. If you were expecting like only outbound on 443 or whatever,
Google.com, like you said, you can go out to Google or you can go out to this API provider, and that's it.
Yeah. Right. No, that's true. I mean, you stop it at the network tier, and you've got the code running through the template, but the remote code execution, you're not downloading the class file, right?
You cannot even do the Ldap query. It will be like,
it's blocked, right? It times out. But I mean, could you still DDoS that app by just making it make a bunch of network requests and then just have a bunch of open connections? I mean, even from there, like, there's still pain.
Yeah, but it's not like
it's not your data is leaking out. It's not you're executing code. It's
big difference.
It is being DDoSed versus being exploited and having data leak.
So, and because, like, for the record, you've seen the name, Log4Shell. The reason that name exists is because while I was just popping calculators on my box, the real risk is a remote shell. So the real risk is that code that gets injected opens up an SSH port that allows me to shell back in with the same permissions that the app is running. That's game over.
Which could be root. Yeah.
And basically,
in all cases,
many cases it is. Sure.
And basically, that allows them to have access to whatever is on your machine or whatever the machine has access to. So if you're inside of a corporate environment, they can get
fun.
access to databases and everything else.
Like,
Merry Christmas.
Like there was like AWS keys, like, or tokens that
environment variables, print env is available. I mean, you've got access.
So it was one of those where so we are, we were looking up, we were privy to like the a little bit of the Java championships, but I think, Michael, you found this one first, where we had like internal chat and he drops it in, and like Michael drops in links all the time. I'm like, yeah, sure, whatever. This one was, wait a minute.
Oh shit.
Click on it.
This one's going to make me work late.
He's not just being paranoid. What?
Yeah, no. And it's like, shit.
Yeah.
And it was I was like, raising alarms, and it was loud though. Like if you're a Java developer, you either heard it, you saw it running through a tweet, somebody will put you in, like, because this made it to like CBS, NPR, and see, like, everywhere. Like that's how bad it was.
Well, the depth is also incredible because, I mean, so folks I've been working for, I mean, so you're patching your app if your app happens to use Log4j 2. So I've had to do that. And, you know, the 15 came out, and then they determined that 15 did not completely solve it. So then there's 216. You know, the amount of analysis you have to put into is significant because, like, some people shade logging files, right? So you just shade it into your app. So you're looking at your dependency. Yeah, we don't have Log4j. Yeah, but we just shaded in the Jndi lookup, or we're shading in Log4j. I mean, one of the apps I use is Carafe. It's an OSGI container that has PAX logging. PAX logging has every single logging implementation, which is great. But it means that it has Log4j2 shaded into it. So we had to wait not just for Log4j2 to release the fix, but the PAX testing to release a shaded jar with the 2.6 release in it. And then we were able to take it. It wasn't a huge delay, but like it's something that you have to consider.
With the shade, did they change the package?
No, the package is the same.
Okay.
The package is the same.
Because if they did that, it makes it even harder to find.
Yeah, no, you have no idea. And I mean, it goes even further. There are clients that I had that had Java agents where the agent was logging Log4j. So we had to upgrade the APM that was being used. So, I mean, it's like you're upgrading that, you're upgrading your app. Hey, does this stuff all still work together? Like, you know, it's like, yeah, well, we got to get it out. And I mean, that's where a lot of folks' weekends went. Like, it's one of those vulnerabilities that snowballed because there's so many places that it can be injected. There's so many things you have to check, and there's so many different things out there on how to solve it. Like we've provided one instance of it, right? So you upgrade to the newer version, you set the property, but there's, you know, we were looking at tweets from Martine Verberg, who had written an agent that would basically not allow that code to be executed, where it would do that. So if you had a running Java app that you had to attach something to because you couldn't restart it, that would be an approach you could use. You know, I had folks that were working at companies that I was consulting at where they were writing Nginx plugins to block headers that had that pattern in it. And it was like, boy, I'm not jealous of you. Like, there are so many different ways this can manifest itself being coded. Like, good luck with that approach. But
when you depend on a regular expression to block something, it's, you know, you're gonna miss some weird ass corner case. Like,
I'm glad I'm hourly.
As a Spring guy, I do feel responsible to say that by and large, Spring is not impacted by this. Spring Boot's default logging implementation is logback.
Yep.
And Spring, the entire portfolio is SL4J, which allows you to use whichever, logback, Log4j, whatever you want. We do have a starter, a Spring Boot starter for Log4j. So if you chose to use that, you'd use the same mitigation technique. So you upgrade the version of Log4j, you'll basically override ours until we get a release out, or use the property. But if you're just using the defaults of Spring, you should not be vulnerable.
Yeah, but you do have to make sure that you're not bringing the Log4j starter. Two things I wanted to like real quick just go over. The first one is the word that Bob was using, shading, which is, it was a weird word for it's essentially if you're not familiar with this, it's a technique that libraries tend to use to lock in very specific versions of packages, and the shading part comes in because what they're doing is essentially if you think about it, you bring in Log4j, you unpack all the code, change the package name, repack it again, and then include it in your library. And the reason people do this is because some libraries are incompatible between minor and major versions. So sometimes a library owner will say, look, I want to just shade this because I know my library will work with these particular dependency versions, and I don't want to, quote unquote, collide with anyone else, whatever they're using. So it's it's a hard problem, and sometimes shading, it is one of the better solutions. But in this particular case, if you happen to be shading a logging framework, then yeah, it's very hard. Like Bob said, it's extremely hard to find those. You almost have to search for like Log4J, not necessarily the package name, but just like, is somebody like Log4J in anywhere on your dependency?
Yeah, or you're looking at the POM that gets shaded in. Like it was a little bit more
If
complicated.
you control it.
Even if you don't, like you're looking, if you're shading it, like you're pulling it. So the PAX logging example for Carafe, for Apache Carafe, because Apache Carafe uses Log4j too by default. The PAX logging shading doesn't change the package name, it's there. And there's a properties file dumped into the meta-inf where you can validate, okay, this is 2.16. That's my happy place to say, okay, I'm updated to the one that does not have the vulnerability. But yeah, shading does make that more complex, where it's like, okay, it's just a class file. I don't have anything from that. You're using metadata and other things to get some sort of comfort that I'm at the right version.
Right. And the second one is one of our applications, like we were doing an auditing, and one of our applications was using Log4j 2 version 2.7 or 8, something that was.
Oh, so you're before, you can't property that.
Yeah, no, the thing was that we thought, right, we drop in the 2.16 and then try to build it, and it broke. There is incompatibilities between like 2.6 and 2.16. Like it's not a drop-in thing anymore. Then it's open it up, figure out what changed, what was deprecated. There was some like web configure, but not the web configure. There was some configuration things that were deprecated or moved around, really. That's what it was. But if you're in a very older 2 version of Log4j, you might need to to schedule time, because there were incompatible changes introduced between 2.x01 and 2.16. So
Do we know? So we talked a little bit about the history of the Jndi and whatnot. Do we know what the motivation was for adding the flag that allows you to turn it off?
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't actually looked at the commit history on the flag.
Right. Like somebody thought about this.
But clearly somebody thought about it.
There was a thought process that like we should be able to turn this off.
It might be my first inclination will have been performance, like because you're regexing for a particular pattern, right? But you're right. Maybe there was something more to it than that.
Yeah, I mean it's interesting because you look through social media, you look at the news, and there's a lot of bashing to the Log4j community. But the one thing I am super impressed with I think it validates the open source approach is how quickly the community, again, a bunch of unpaid volunteers, was able to provide an intermediate patch and then a more permanent patch to the problem. Like, so the reaction time, if you compare that to any sort of enterprise software company, they're right on par, if not better.
That was one thing that I was curious about. Does Apache have a set of private channels for the internal team to discuss the mitigation of a CD?
Yeah, so there's actually a security team at the ASF.
Well, not so much as a team, but like if I'm a committer on Log4j and I figure out, hey, Log4j is vulnerable.
You're saying is there a private? Yeah, so
private place I should take this conversation.
Exactly. So if within the Apache ecosystem, every single project has an @private email list. So the @private is only available to PMC members. So when vulnerabilities are found, either internal from the Apache security team or an external person, you can email the private email list, and that is not going to the entire world because the dev lists are public, right? The user lists are public. So if you're an individual person and you discover a vulnerability, and I don't want to broadcast this to the world because of the impact of that, and I want to talk to the people that are navigating the project, there's two there's two lists to hit, and one is security, and I don't know that one off the top of my head, but if you do private at log4j.apache.org, that goes to the PMC. You may not be included on the replies at private, but they will interact with you directly if you discover something. So for anybody out there that's listening, that's interested in open source and they find vulnerabilities, the private lists are the best way to talk to the PMC and to notify them, hey, I found something bad and you guys should fix it without notifying the rest of the world.
Now right. Here's a question I do want to bring up, because and this is actually the opposite, not necessarily like bashing the Apache folks, because they did a heroic effort to actually cut 2 versions in like less than a week. How about the disclosure? The disclosure of the vulnerability didn't went to Apache directly. It was just broadcast to the world. And I know usually is courtesy for, I think even for Heartbleed, like they first talked to like the matter, like Intel and AMD first before they disclosed it. In this particular case, essentially it was disclosed. I don't know how the process of disclosure was. I know that this came from an Alibaba research, but it was essentially dropped in the middle of it, and then everybody was left scrambling for like, for like 3 days straight. Like, the guys didn't sleep until they figure out how to do it. So the question I have was that appropriate, or should have they gone to the ASF first before announcing it to the world?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to anything that was said on any private list to say confirm or deny whether anything was said to the ASF first. All I can say is I can encourage developers that do find CVEs that are looking for that private channel to folks that have commit rights and that can take action. Like the private lists and the security group are good means to contact. Any responsible person that finds a vulnerability should just, it's good to disclose these things, but yeah, I mean, there's ways that you can do it so that people have time to react.
Right. And this is not about transparency. It's more about impact, right?
Sure.
Like the idea is that because the way it felt was like the vulnerability was announced and there was no solution. Like there was almost like Apache recourse, but there was no like, this is what we should all do. Like now we know that the real thing that we should all do is like upgrade to 2.16 and
yeah,
beat it, right? But 2.16 didn't exist when that was announced. So
correct. It took what, 2 days?
Yeah, but
which is an eternity when you have a vulnerability at this level. I'm not trying to downsell it. Yeah. I'm just trying to, the reaction to the community was about as good as you can get. I mean, there's really not much more that team could have done to deal with what was done. They reacted to it. They cut a release. It was clear that the governance model worked in that sense. I mean, the only part that you feel like, hey, geez, could we have found this sooner? Right? Is there an option where somebody was pen testing the source? Because I mean, the criticism of open source that resonates is like logging is a commodity and there's nobody that's like behind it paying for logging, and people make it like it's a money issue. And I don't know that it's a money issue, but it's an attention issue, right? There's probably not enough eyeballs on the source code to vet out every single vulnerability that's there. And is there a better way for us to do that, to get ahead of this stuff, to say, hey, wait, Jndi is not the most secure Java protocol in the world. Are you sure we should be using this? I mean,
by default, on by default, that is the,
right.
Yeah.
And in hindsight's 2020, it's so easy for us to come back and say, oh, geez, how did they miss that? I mean, again, it was a feature. You don't want to break backwards compatibility. I understand the community's decision to be like, all right, let's just leave it in. But, things like this should probably make any Java project that's open source or closed source really think hard about how they're using Jndi in their framework.
or really think hard about how they're using everything in their frameworks, because
Yeah.
anything could be vulnerable, you know. So it's really just important to stay up to date and to stay current with what is going on in the technology, and to know what kind of exploits are out there. And it's really a good idea if you're an open source developer, especially if you have things on GitHub. It's easy to go to the projects and see what's vulnerable, because they do a good job of flagging. I also did find a tool, I think it was Snick, but there could be others out there as well, which you can use on Maven to flag in your own projects anything
Correct.
that you're a dependency that you have that's vulnerable.
Snake is free for personal use. You do have
Dependabot from GitHub. I mean, there's a lot of different tools out there, but these are all based on known CVEs.
Right.
I guess I'm talking about, is there a way for us to start looking at this before they become CVEs to say, hey, wait a minute.
Yeah, no, it's because it's people being, it's interesting because it is both people being in open source, but also getting the people that are like this, the ones like almost like SecOps people looking at this stuff. And
you're talking about probably billions of lines of open source code that would need to be reviewed. It's the scale isn't there.
It's down. I think there's not enough. There's just not enough knowledge. Like people holding that knowledge that can look at it.
It's not enough knowledge. It's not enough people.
Yeah.
It takes a while to
throughput.
do these kinds of reviews. Like every commit, every version of every open source library. It's just unrealistic. There's just aren't enough security people out there.
No,
and you know, the security world really looks at it as, assume you've been hacked, you have to, how fastly can you mitigate? How fast can you correct and move on? And that's exactly what this is. Log4j did a great job turning around quickly. Now, at your enterprise, how quickly can you take and apply that patch?
Yeah, and it's one of those where sometimes I worry, like the Cisco published a list of routers that you need to upgrade, and there's all these appliances that happen to log things that it's running on a corner somewhere on your on even on your house, and you have no idea that it's logging things to a little file using Log4j. This one is going to hurt for a while.
Yeah, the IoT world, you know, the areas of technology that have difficulty upgrading because it really is a ship it and you're done. Like that is the spot where this vulnerability will likely exist
forever,
for a while. Like enterprise software development, you know, a lot of what we're paid to do has reacted to this in a very impressive pace, but there's a number of unconnected or seldom connected devices where this type of upgrade is either not feasible or very difficult. And that's where this stuff hurts, right? So, you know, I don't have all the fixes. I mean, I think, you know, again, to Michael's point, the bar at this point is how quickly do the communities react to it, and the reaction has been admirable and it has been very good. And I feel it restores a lot of confidence in the open source community.
Yeah.
But could we be doing more? I think is a valid question that people that commit to open source, people that are running foundations, people that are accepting open source and using open source need to be asking. You know, and I know for a fact that folks at Apache are asking these questions and working on trying to figure out, you know, whether there's more that we could be doing to keep our users safe.
Right. Now, going to one of the last things that we have with that, like a lot of this is generated a backlash for the Java programming language. Right, we start hearing, oh, don't use Java. Java is insecure. Like, and I think it's one of those where it's like the armchair advocates where they just have an opinion and it just goes out on Twitter, where it's like, yeah, right, like the I think it's unfair the way that it's being framed. What do you guys think?
Oh, 100%. I mean, it's not only Java, but also open source. It's opening up both those conversations again, and it's disappointing. I mean, in both cases, here's a sharp knife. Don't cut yourself, right? I mean, you can do stupid things with anything. I agree with Bob in that from disclosure to patch and publicly available, I challenge any closed source operation to have the same turnaround, especially when we will see the long pole of this is not getting the patch out. The long pole in this, by a long shot, is going to be how long it takes the patch to get deployed. I mean, think about struts. The struts vulnerability that hit Equifax.
Yeah.
It was out. It was out for years. Hadn't been deployed. Like how many systems are going to be vulnerable to this? Not because the patch wasn't available, but because somebody didn't deploy it.
Yeah.
Yeah, those enterprise systems that are just running and people don't know it. I mean, lots of big companies out there, they've got software probably running where, the people who built it are gone and they're still running this software and they don't know. It's areas like that that are real scary.
Yeah, I've had clients that were running COBOL systems where, the last code comment was stuff that was built when I was 3. Like, I mean, this stuff exists. It exists outside of the JVM space, so it's not a Java specific problem. It's a technology specific problem. What this has actually shown that developers that are keeping up to date on their dependencies, keeping up to date on their JDK versions are less susceptible to these problems than folks that are just saying, well, we're just going to keep running the old stuff because if it ain't broke, don't touch it. Upgrades make a difference.
Yeah, no.
I think, modern platforms will start to help with some of this stuff. And I'm a little biased that I could work with them, but, the Paquito build packs, for example, recently Spring started updating our website with our support policy. So what's in support, what's out of support, open source and whatnot. Paquito big build packs actually take that data in and will log out. Hey, you're using stuff that's out of support.
Right.
So like platforms can help with this kind of thing. They can say, hey, you're using the old version of this library. You're using a vulnerable version of this library. Like, I think we're going to start seeing more of that kind of functionality built into the different platforms that we run on.
No, and I think part of it is also like this so one of the things that happens is that before problems were used to be contained, right? Like nothing was as interconnected as it is today, right? Like you essentially, I can create a botnet just by paying, $10,000 one day and suddenly try to, create a denial service attack somewhere else. Like it is one of those where what you're seeing is not that it's Java's fault. It's like, it happens on the industry all the time. If anything, Java's both mitigation and the way that they tend to do the security vulnerabilities where they actually patch it up, do a new release, they try to do the end of life. They actually are very explicit. Like I remember when Java 8 was being discontinued, like it was like, look, if you still on 8, you gotta get an Oracle support contract or somebody support contract because vulnerabilities are coming. Like that message was loud and clear when it was said, right? So it's I think the one thing that is happening is the impact now is endemic. Because again, if this was just like in isolated networks that are not connected to the internet and somebody from Russia or China can try to actually get into you just by loading your page and sending an HTTP referrer with a small form string.
All
like
takes.
It's crazy, right? So yeah, I don't think this is that Java is insecure. These things happen all the time. We're seeing is that if anything, Java is pervasive. We know that Apple is running it on the back end now. We sort of knew that, but then it's kind of like, yeah, that when it went down to make the call, it's running a Java system that has Log4J on it. So So yeah, I don't think that is a fair criticism. If anything, what Bob said, upgrade your libraries, whitelist first. All these things is what we learn, and it's like what is it called, the grill, like the cheese model, where it's like there are holes on everything that you do. It's just if you do all these things, patch top, have latest, subscribe to bulletins, whitelist, protect your crown jewels, then you will be okay.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, and so I mean, it's following best practices. It's again, I'm open to suggestions on how we can do it better. But given what went down, it's pretty impressive.
It was as good as it got, right?
Yeah. With what we have, this was a pretty good reaction.
I mean, it can happen to any language. We've seen it happen to Microsoft a couple of years ago. We've seen it happen in many different areas. It's not a Java thing. This week it's a Java thing, but anytime.
Yeah, hardly was processors.
Yeah.
Both
it can
of
happen
them.
anyway.
There's nothing you could have done there either. So.
I think it's just it's important for developers like everyone's saying here, just to be vigilant and don't keep releasing the same dependencies with your code for years just because it works. You have to look at what's the latest, what's vulnerable. You have to pay attention when you're doing a release, and I know it makes it tougher because some things might break. You might have to do a little more work than you wanted to do to get that release out, but it's important to try and stay up to date.
The easier you can make that update process, the better.
Yep.
Because you don't want to be in a situation where you are in this and you can't upgrade for a week or two because you don't know if it's going to work, right? You don't know, you don't have enough test coverage to make sure that the app still works. It's got to go through a whole manual process, automating as much of this as possible. So it is just a matter of update dependency, run my unit tests. Oh, this thing broke, fix it, and route. That should be the goal.
Yep. And the little piece of advice: if you upgrade your dependencies at a certain often, it hurts less. If you wait 2 years to upgrade, I did that a couple of times. Oh gosh, it hurts. So yeah, going from Spring 1 to Spring 2. Yeah.
If it hurts, do it more. That's what they say.
Wait. Spring 1 to Spring 2?
Or whatever it was.
Spring Boot. I'm sure he's talking about Boot. Freddie was still doing financial stuff at Spring 1 and Spring 2. That's where frameworks were just like, what? Frameworks?
I'm like,
Spring 1. Boot 1.5 to something.
Yeah, and the only other thing is if you are a security person or if you do find vulnerabilities, there are responsible ways of reporting them. www.apache.org/security has an entire page dedicated to the processes of how you contact the Apache security team if you're trying to get open source vulnerabilities out with Apache managed projects. So there's a number of folks on that team. They're very senior Apache members. So I mean, if you find something, that is the best way to get that out without exposing that vulnerability to the entire world. So I highly encourage everybody to check out the security page at apache.org.
Yeah, no, and if you find something on Spring, just tweet at Michael Minell.
Yeah, just send it to Michael. That's his problem.
Oh,
what is the Spring you speak?
What is the Spring you speak of?
No, last thing before we end it up. If you happen to have survived this particular endeavor, we have a T-shirt for you. So I don't know if you allow sharing, Bob. Oh, you do allow sharing.
Yes, I did allow it.
So we actually are on Etsy. We have T-shirts, and we have this funny T-shirt, which is like I survived CVE 2021 4422228, which is the Log4J vulnerability. It has our pretty logo on there. So if you happen to be a manager that have to ask your developers to stay over the weekend fixing these things, first buy them dinner and a care package. And if there is any leftover, get them the t-shirt. Right? We're gonna just, it's like a little fun little thing. Because this one will be remembered for a long time.
I so badly wanted to change that URL to actually be a real exploit that just logged the OffHeap logo.
Oh no! Bad Michael.
Sends your credit card to Michael's account or just pennies. No, great. I mean, t-shirt's great. We're hoping. I mean, again, we're all really excited to get back to conferences and hopefully start seeing people again. If we see the shirt, definite fist bump from us. So, check it out. And 2021 is about to be closed for the OffHeap crew. Now, another big year. COVID did not slow us down on our recording. So, hope you guys enjoyed this year. I know I certainly have. Good to see everybody in person except Freddie again. But to 2022.
2022.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Yeah, that's all there is. And Michael has some last words he always says on every podcast.
If you're on Twitter, make sure to follow us at OffHeap. And if you're watching this on YouTube, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.
All right. Another one done.
All right. I will stop the